And now the moment we've all been waiting for. Here's a man who doesn't require an introduction. I'm delighted to be joined by the legendary actor, comedian and screenwriter, John Cleese, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, John.
I'm very happy to be here. And this is the entire audience for tonight,
That's
is it?
exactly right, yes.
Right.
I think there's some others watching at home, though.
Oh, they do?
Yes,
People
they do.
watch it at home in their own houses.
It's a remarkable adventure.
It's going to catch on, that.
John, I wanted to talk to you about creativity.
Yeah.
Because I read your wonderful book on the subject.
It's good, isn't it?
It is a great little book called Creativity. And I wanted to ask you about it because you make some very interesting points about this that people won't have thought of. I think people think that creativity is the sort of domain of the elite few, just a few kind of artists.
It's just the ability to know how to come up with better ideas. And it doesn't matter what the ideas are. It could be flower arranging, or it could be quantum physics, except you've got to work for 20 years before you're in a state where you can do anything creative. You see what I mean?
You've got to know a few things for that.
But people think creativity, are people born with it? Well, obviously some people are born with more of it. It's like a footballer or a cricketer. Some of them are enormously talented when they start, and some are less talented but work incredibly hard and become as good. But people don't understand that it's just a question of learning, really, and I know this sounds a bit weird, how to work with your unconscious.
Yes.
Because we're all taught that the only thing that matters is the conscious mind. And when most of us in education, we're told how to be good at criticizing things and breaking things down and analyzing things. And there's a completely different way of thinking about things, which you're never told about at school.
So when did you first realise that you were, well, not just a creative person, but you were able to harness this ability?
Well, it was when I got to Cambridge. I mean, I got into Cambridge on science, which I wasn't very interested in. And then I discovered that the people coming up to study science at Cambridge with me were going to be quite interested in science, and I thought that gave them a huge advantage over me. So I thought that I'll move to something else. So I went to law. Now, those are all very what they call left hemisphere, all to do with words and accuracy.
Yes.
And then I joined the Footlights, which was that club that produced Peter Cook and Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie.
Those are the comedy actor troupe.
Yeah, so it's a great little club, and we had a little club room, and I discovered I could write things that made people laugh. And suddenly, at the age of 22, I thought, oh, I'm creative. So I watched the process.
Yes.
And what I noticed was at the evening sometime I'd write a sketch and I had the usual problem all we comics have, which is the punchline.
Of course.
And you sit there for 45 minutes and go to bed. And then in the morning I'd get up, make a cup of coffee, sit at the desk, and within 90 seconds, you'd have the answer.
This is something you mention in your book. You call it intelligent unconsciousness.
Yes. Because we kind of think the word unconscious is Freudian stuff for all the bad feelings and negative emotions that we sort of put in the dustbin and try and keep the lid on. But actually, you all know that you can drive from your home to your office, that kind of thing, and you're not really driving. Your unconscious is doing it for you. You can think about anything else you like tying a shoelace. You tie a shoelace, you're not thinking about it, you're just handing it over. And people don't realize how helpful and how powerful the unconscious is. And there's a wonderful experiment where some psychologists got an audience just like you guys, maybe twice as big, and showed them, well, no, 50% big,
yeah,
and tried to show them Chinese ideograms, you know, Chinese characters. And they showed them, and then they came back a few days later and they said, we're going to show you some more. Some you saw last week, some you've never seen before. We want you to tell us which ones you saw last week. And they were hopeless, like we'd all be. No good at all. I mean, just the same as chance.
Yes.
Then they repeated the experiment, and they showed them Chinese ideograms. And then they said to them the second day, they said, we're going to show you some more. Some you saw last week, some you saw this week. And we just want to tell you which ones you kind of slightly prefer. You look at some of the shapes and you think, I like that shape. And then, not so keen on that shape. And they told them, and the ones that they liked were the ones they'd seen the week before.
So there's an element of familiarity. to this?
Well, what I mean is that the unconscious actually knew which ones they'd seen.
Yes.
But if you asked it a direct question, it couldn't tell you directly. It would give you a feeling rather than a verbal answer. Now, the greatest of the Renaissance art critics, Bernard Berenson, you could always tell when a painting was a fake. But he didn't analyze the brushstroke. He used to sit there in front of the painting, and if he started to feel slightly ill, it was a fake.
Right. So it's about trusting your intuition a lot of the time.
Well, it's about understanding how to work with it.
And how does
Because you can only trust it to some extent, Andrew. You can trust it to some extent, but that kind of thinking where you are allowing your unconscious to give you information which doesn't come to you in neat typed out things, it comes from feeling, a certain feeling, that kind of thinking is very important for a certain kind of problem.
So that's very interesting, the idea that you rely on your intuition to a point, but then you apply a kind of discipline to it.
Oh, well, you've got to do that. The critical thinking has to come in at the end. But the trouble is people start thinking critically before they've really developed their idea, and that way you don't get anywhere. So you have to learn how to create a special space where you're free from interruptions, because interruptions are death to any kind of creativity. And you can just sit there for, let's say, an hour and a half, and just let your mind play.
Yes.
Because everything to do with creativity is to do with play, the ability to play.
That's interesting that you mentioned this idea of interruption, because there's actually a sketch from a Monty Python show about the idea of a great creative, Beethoven, in fact, being repeatedly interrupted. I think we might have a clip of this.
Oh, it's one of my favourites. Graham Chapman and I wrote this. We wrote that before I had any of these ideas. Instinctively, I knew how hard it was. You'd be sitting there at my desk, often late at night, because it was quieter and the phone wasn't ringing. And I would be sort of building up this scene in my mind, and the phone would go. You'd answer the phone, put the phone down, and then, where were you?
Yes.
It takes something like, one study said 12 minutes, another study said it's 20 minutes before you're back in the same moment in your mind that you were when you were interrupted. So the time wasted is huge with interruption.
And this is the famous case of Coleridge writing the Kubla Khan, is that he woke up from this fevered opium dream with this complete poem in his mind. A man from Porlock knocks on the door. By the time he gets back, he's only got 54 lines. He can't remember any more. So it's a tragedy lost to literature.
I know, extraordinary, because that man from Porlock.
This is just because of that man. And that sketch, I mean, you mentioned that you wrote that with Graham Chapman. And I wonder about whether, when you talk about this idea that instinct needs to be reckoned with...
I don't like this word instinct, you see, because it's got too many connotations.
Right.
But I would rather say something like faster thinking, which is what we're taught in maths. You know, a train leaves Edinburgh at such and such a speed, a train leaves London at such and such a speed, you know, and the distance is at what point do they crash?
Yes.
You know, that kind of thing. You don't need any intuition or creativity. It's probably a matter of logic. So to apply a creativity to a problem like that's ridiculous. But if you're trying to think, how do I control, if you're a manager, how do I control this slightly difficult group? You don't solve that by lots and lots of quick, sharp, logical thinking. You have to sit back and sort of absorb it, and that's where you need to create a creative space where you can just sit quietly. And, of course, the first thing you do when you sit down, you shut the door and you say, right, the first thing you think, I should have called Bob.
Right.
And then you thought, and I forgot to buy the cat a birthday present.
Yeah, all those
and
other
then,
things.
Oh, and then that book I was supposed to return to. All these things. It's a little bit like meditation because you get all these silly little trivial ideas. But if you just sit there, like the Buddhists say, the cloudy water begins to settle. And after about 15, 20 minutes, you start getting ideas, but you've no idea if they're any good.
And does that work with the collaborative process as well? Does that
Yes.
work when you have Graham Chapman in the room or the other Pythons?
Once you learn to trust each other, because when you're being creative, this is a very odd thing you were never taught at school. When you're being creative, there is no such thing as a mistake. Because until you explore it, you have no idea whether it will lead you in an interesting direction or not. And if you start criticizing your stuff before you've just sat there and played with it innocently, not knowing where you're going to, if you start criticizing, the whole thing collapses and you get nowhere. I think it's a disappointment. Oh, you must tell me, because did you do English?
Yes, I did. I studied
Well,
English.
you see, I think if you study English and then you start trying to write a novel, you write a sentence, you know, and you suddenly think, well, that's a bit green, actually, I better not do that. And you write another sentence. You see what I mean?
Yes, you end up sounding like all your heroes.
Yeah, that's right.
And imitating.
So you're having all these interruptions, which you're actually creating yourself in your own mind. So that's why you got to get quiet and then let these silly little thoughts settle. I always have a yellow sticky there. So if it says call Andrew, I must call Andrew. And then I can forget about it once I've written it on the sticky, and then let the cloudy water settle, and then just have ideas, and then play, because it doesn't matter how clever or intelligent or well-informed you are. If you can't play, you'll never be creative.
And how long did it take for you, with the other Pythons, to get to a position where you trusted each other and have that freedom to play?
It's a bit like dating. Well, the first time you date, you don't want to say something stupid to you know what I mean?
Yes.
And you've got to get to the point where you're relaxed enough with someone and you feel very comfortable with them. And at that point, you could say anything. Like you and me, we have a very good creative relationship with our show that's coming up, because we just try things.
Yeah.
And we might say something very stupid, but it doesn't matter because it might lead to something very interesting.
Yes, absolutely.
But this play thing is absolutely crucial. And the greatest research ever done was done by an American called McKinnon in the 60s on architects. He was particularly interested in architects. And he went around the creative architects and said, what do you do from the moment you get up in the morning to the moment you go to bed at night? And then he went around the non-creative architects. So he didn't tell them that was why he was talking to them. And he said, what do you do from the morning and you get up in the... And the only difference was two things. One was that the creative architects could play. They could just sit there with ideas and just play. And the other thing, which is interesting and the opposite of everything we believe in our society, is that the creative architects took as long as possible to make up their mind.
Yes.
Because they didn't hold anything up. But the first one I made many years ago, I used to make training films. And the best lesson I ever learned is if you have a decision to make, the first question you must ask is always, when does this decision have to be made? And you make it at that point. But you don't make it before, because you may get new information and you may get new ideas. So why hurry the process instead of using all the time you've got for new ideas, new information, you see? But people want to be decisive and they think it's all about this, and it isn't.
Well, when you were writing Life of Brian, for instance, you took yourself away to the Bahamas, I believe,
yes,
with the group.
And Barbados, I think.
Oh, Barbados, sorry.
Yeah.
And you were willing to explore
well, it was
those
lovely.
things?
We just talked about the movie for 2 whole weeks. And
Didn't rush it?
In what?
You weren't rushing it in that way?
No, we were taking our time. And as Terry Jones said, we weren't having to take the kids to the dentist. You see what I'm saying? So we could just sit there with it all the time. And we got the whole script really done in 2 weeks.
And you could say that there must have been so many examples where someone might suggest something. If they were afraid of making mistakes or seeming silly, then nothing would...
You don't get anywhere.
No.
You don't get anywhere at all. And the thing is, if you want out creative ideas in a group, the key is diversity. Because if you get a lot of middle-aged white men sitting in a room on some project, at the end of it, they will all say what a splendid business it was, and they'd love to do it again. They thought it was very worthwhile, and they come up with fuck all.
OK, I'm sorry, John, I'm going to have to apologise if anyone was offended by the phrase.
What, fuck? I didn't know fuck was offensive.
John, I'm afraid it's because it's before the watershed, you see.
What?
It's before the watershed, so...
Before the war.
And it's a Sabbath, John, so really.
We're
going to take a break now. We're going to carry on, though, after the break. We have much more to say. Some of it is Ofcom compliant. I'll see you in a few minutes.
I do apologise.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. I'd just like to apologise again for the bad language that we had before the break. John, can we...
I apologise. You can slap me on...
There we go, right.
Osteoporosis.
I apologise, John. Anyway, well, if you hadn't sworn, we wouldn't have had to do that. OK, we've brought in our panel here. We have Diane and Bruce, who are listening in on that. And, of course, Diane, you know, you're a stand-up comedian as well. You go through this creative process. Did anything that John say resonate with you?
A lot resonated with me. I thought it was interesting about the leaning into it and sort of letting it wash into you.
Yes,
because I'm always rewriting.
Yes.
Because obviously I need to sort of, you know, have I got the right word? Am I writing it in the right order? Did you have any particular habits that you noticed about yourself? Because I will write jokes in the wrong order. And it's only after I've done them for a couple of years, ironically in front of a crowd, that I'll suddenly go, oh, my good grief, that needs to be completely switched round, and then it's twice as good.
Yes. Well, there's about 6 different points in there. One is that the greatest teacher you ever have in comedy is the audience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they tell you if it's funny. And as my daughter once said, being a comedian's a bit like being a matador, because the feedback is so immediate.
Yes.
You know?
I've met your daughter. She's lovely. Yeah.
She's almost as tall as you.
And it makes you so vulnerable, doesn't it? Well, you know, that's why people in their early days of stand-up, because of that immediacy of the reaction. It's not like a drama where they could just sit there in silence and it's fine.
No.
You depend on them.
And also, it's, you know, what we do, trying to make people laugh, is very, very difficult. And when you fail, you feel terrible.
Yeah.
Do you feel terrible, Bruce?
But
Every day. I've no idea. I'm not happy.
But how do you go about with your creative process? Is quite different because you largely do emceeing rather than written sets, don't you? So that's a different kind of creativity, spontaneity, I suppose.
Or schizophrenia, some people might call it. Yeah, no, I don't know. I just turn up. I've never really thought about it. If
Right.
you see what I mean? I don't really see that I go through a process or whatever. It's just I do what.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds really kind of mealy.
Do you do much preparation, though?
No.
No.
No. Bitch,
You
please.
see,
We're all tired.
you and Eddie Izzard, I hate you guys because you don't do any hard work.
I'm not standing for Labour, so don't hate me. No.
But that's very interesting because someone like Eddie Izzard, who has that spontaneity...
Oh, he goes on.
You know,
yeah.
As he walks on stage, he doesn't know what he's going to say.
No?
Terrify me.
Yes.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I've got a couple of bits that I trot out, sort of thing, but by and large, it's just like, oh, what now? I'm out of work. Like, this is a huge inconvenience.
Yes.
So just have a quick blather with them and they seem fine.
So what you were talking about, what I call the carpentry, when you've got the idea, but are you getting the phrases right? That seems to me technical. That doesn't seem to be particularly creative. That's something we learn to do as we go along. But the creativity is the idea that before we apply the carpentry.
I totally see what you mean, but equally at the same time, I find that a very particular word will have such a certain rhythmic flavour, and it will suddenly elevate the whole thing. But also,
because sometimes you get a word and you suddenly get a new idea,
Yes.
and that takes you off.
Yes. We actually don't have much time, but I just want to come to you, John, finally about this.
Am I allowed to say the word yet?
No. At 9 o'clock, you can let rip. But this show won't be on then. So you'll be out in the car park, so you can do it there.
Oh, well, this is most disappointing.
John, I want, before we go, because we don't have much time, just to quickly ask you about the show that we are working on at the moment for this channel. And this is the Dinosaur Hour. And we'll...
People who are determined to stay out of touch.
Yes. So lots of unfashionable people getting together and having interesting conversation.
Well, the idea is, I think that television... I did a program like this with David Frost in 1966. And, you know, he couldn't get anyone to go on his show because he was sort of associated with That Was the Week That Was and all the satire. And then he had a guy called Ernest Marples, eventually went on the show, and it was a good interview, and the next day the phone rang. Everyone wanted to be on the show. Now, here, everybody's worried, or a lot of the left people are worried, because they say it's a right-wing channel. There's a lot of right-wing programs on it. But what I want to do is to have something that isn't particular one slant or another, and that has people talking to each other, and more important, listening to each other, to see what are the areas. If you take woke, well, a lot of good ideas in work. Also, in my opinion, a lot of not very good ideas in work. What are the good ideas? What are the ideas we don't agree with? Why do they not want public debate? What's the reason for that kind of thing? So, and actually talked about it in a nice, relaxed tone. So we sort of created a sort of silly gentleman's club, and sort of soft chairs and people talking quite closely to each other.
Please tell me you'll have cats.
Oh, yes.
Yes!
We will have cats.
I was hoping you'd have
come on
cats.
the show, yes.
I would love to.
Oh, yes. Can you bring your cat?
I don't have one.
That, I'm afraid, is all we've got time for.
Buy one if you come on
the discussion has descended into cats.
If you come on the show, will you buy a cat?
Commit to a cat.
All right, I'm going to put my foot down here. That's the end of this section of the show. But next up, after the break, we have the dancer who was forced to resign from her own company. That's Rosie Kay. Don't go anywhere.